Early 1900s. The American road isn't a highway, it's a meat grinder. Mack brings raw cast iron mass to the east. Peterbilt brings polished aluminum to the west. For a century, these two titans waged a brutal blood and oil war. But the ultimate threat didn't come from the mud or each other. It came from a mandate. The legendary million-mile rigs, banging through Mack Maxitorque gears and floating Eaton 18 speeds, are being hunted. The soot-covered diesels that dragged World War I artillery are being suffocated. This is the 100-year war of Mack and Peterbilt, and the silent lithium gamble threatening to erase them forever. The story starts in the dirt and grease of the early 1900s. Trucks weren't shiny highway cruisers yet. They were raw, heavy iron built to replace the horse, choking on their own black, sooty exhaust. In Brooklyn, the Mack brothers were forging an industrial workhorse. Out west, T.A. Peterman was tired of dragging timber out of the deep, wet forests of the Pacific Northwest. Mack's story begins with a bus. In 1900, Jack and Gus Mack built Old No. 9, a tough 20-passenger rig. It pounded the cobblestones for 8 straight years on bone-jarring, solid rubber tires before getting converted into a truck, eventually racking up a staggering 1,000,000 miles over its 23-year lifespan. That 1,000,000-mile grind forged their core strategy: vertical integration. They built everything in-house. They refused to outsource, demanding that every gear, bolt, and casting could handle the abuse. Mack called this balanced design. They poured their own cast iron blocks from molten metal and forged their own gears in the heat of their own foundries. Engine, transmission, and axles were engineered together as a single unit. Buy a Mack and you got a rig born under one roof, timed and meshed perfectly. While Mack locked down the East Coast with heavy iron, Peterman fought a different war out west. Logging the Pacific Northwest was a brutal gear-snapping game. Steep mountain grades, crushing payloads, and thick, tire-sucking mud. Late 1930s standard trucks just sank and died. Now, Peterman didn't just guess what drivers needed. He spent years rebuilding surplus military rigs for his timber runs, watching standard steel frames crack and warp under the weight of raw wood. In 1939, Peterman bought out Fagel Motors. He wasn't after mass production. He wanted a rig custom-built to survive the punishing timber runs, where snapped axles were just part of the day's work. This launched the custom logger. Mack forced the truck on the driver. Peterman asked the driver what it took to beat the mud. When he rolled out the legendary Model 260 and the enclosed Cab 334 in 1939, they still ran heavy, all-steel cabs trimmed with plywood. It wasn't until 1945 that Peterbilt brought in aluminum frames and cabs, finally shedding a massive 1,500 pounds of dead weight. That weight cut let the rigs float over the damp forest floor instead of trenching axle deep in the muck like standard steel frames. But it wasn't just about the weight. Peterman started dropping heavy-breathing Cummins diesels into the chassis, giving loggers the raw, stump-pulling pound-feet of torque they needed to crawl out of the deep valleys. For heavy truck builders, the era was pure survival. Mack stayed alive through massive World War I military contracts. The British bought roughly 2,000 Mack ACs, and the U.S. Army ordered another 4,500. This vital flood of cash let Mack experiment and grow while competitors folded. Over in the muddy trenches of Europe, British soldiers watched these blunt-nosed American trucks plow through artillery-chewed roads. The stubborn, roaring rigs reminded them of a bulldog. The name stuck. And that blunt snout wasn't just for looks. Mack mounted the radiator directly behind the engine to protect it from front-end smashes, keeping the fan belts safely out of the deep mud. Mack's legendary chief engineer, Alfred Masery, actually carved the first bulldog hood ornament out of a block of soap while recovering from surgery. It wasn't marketing, it was a badge of honor earned in blood, soot, and mud. Back home, Peterman took a massive gamble. He pushed expensive custom rigs into a market flooded with cheap, mass-produced iron. Being a small player in heavy machinery is usually a death sentence. But Peterman knew an Oregon logger didn't give a damn about a Brooklyn shipyard. They cared about traction, raw pound-feet of torque, and power-to-weight ratios. Mack's ultimate test of mechanical endurance came at the Hoover Dam. It was a brutal job, moving millions of tons of rock in 120-degree Fahrenheit desert heat. They brought in a Mack AP Super Duty. These massive chain-driven beasts packed 150 horsepower inline-six, moving up to 14 tons of rock per trip while grinding through the grit and dust. The truck beds were built so thick that volcanic boulders dropped from shovels shattered against the steel instead of denting the floor. Moving mountains at the dam cemented the Mack legend. If a job broke other machines, you called the Bulldog. But the late 1940s brought change. World War II ended, and the industry pivoted from hauling dirt to running long-haul freight coast to coast. Mack's heavy steel frames, perfect for a rock quarry, were dead weight on the highway. Aluminum was creeping into the industry, and that lightweight metal was about to hand the West Coast boys a weapon to challenge Mack's Iron Throne. The industry split into two camps, Eastern brute strength and Western precision. Mack built its name on the purebred concept. Every piece was cast and machined to work together. A gold Bulldog on the hood meant an all-Mack powertrain, engine, transmission, and axles born in the same plant. A silver dog meant a third-party iron like a Cummins block sat between the frame rails. For Mack, that gold mascot proved a balanced design could outhaul and outlast the rest. While Mack doubled down on thick steel, Peterbilt nearly vanished. When founder T.A. Peterman died, his widow Ida sold the company to management, but held on to the dirt it sat on. In 1958, she nearly buried the brand by announcing she was dozing that Oakland plant to build a shopping center called Foothill Square. Unable to afford a new factory, the owners sold out to Pacific Car and Foundry. Packer fronted a massive $2 million move to Newark, giving Peterbilt the cash to push their aluminum advantage. They didn't use aluminum for looks. They built trucks like Boeing bombers. Bucking solid aircraft rivets handled the heavy frame twist of steep mountain grades. While Mack stuck to heavy steel for their famous B model to conquer the dirt, Peterbilt chased Aerospace alloys. Less dead weight on the steers meant more payload in the box and more cash in the pocket. Out of this came the Peterbilt 351. A rig so ahead of its time it stayed in production for a staggering 22 years. It featured a narrow, needle-nose profile and stamped aluminum butterfly hood. That narrow snout gave drivers a clear line of sight on treacherous cliffside two-lanes. The split hood meant you could wrench on the block long before full-tilt fiberglass hoods took over. And under that split hood, you'd usually find a screaming two-stroke Detroit diesel or Big Cam Cummins pushing serious horsepower. It looked like a stretched hot rod and rode like a hotel on wheels, leaving the competition's bare metal cabs in the dust. By the 1950s, the lines were drawn. Prestige versus pedigree. Mack ruled the dirt. If you hauled crushed gravel or poured wet concrete, you ran a Mack. It was a blunt, unbreakable hammer. But if you owned your own rig pulling freight across state lines, you ran a Peterbilt. It was the highway scalpel, cementing Peterbilt's reputation as the true class of the road. Drivers swore by their iron. They'd argue over Mack's lugging Maxidyne engine, mated to that legendary 5-speed Maxitorque transmission, grunting out enough low-end torque that you barely had to touch the stick against the custom comfort of a Pete. But just as the chrome grew thicker and the straight pipes got louder, the government stepped in. It wasn't the feds, though. It was a brutal patchwork of strict state laws dropping the hammer with 55 and 65-foot overall length limits on tractor-trailer combos. They prioritized total payload footage over long nose style. To max out the freight box without breaking the tape measure, the era of the sprawling hood was cut short. The American highway was about to get flat-faced. Flat-faced trucks weren't a style choice, they were a government survival tactic. For decades, federal law measured total vehicle length, front bumper to trailer tail. To pull a longer trailer and turn a profit, you chop the hood. Enter the Cabover engine, COE era. Peterbilt answered with the 352 pacemaker, a flat aluminum box that maximized cargo space, but forced drivers to sit directly on a roaring diesel, right under a metal doghouse that roasted your right leg all summer. To check the oil, you had to manually pump a hydraulic jack to tilt the whole cab forward, sending your coffee cup and logbook crashing into the windshield. That changed with the 1982 Surface Transportation Assistance Act. Washington started regulating just the trailer length, up to 48 feet. Overnight, the cramped, kidney-busting cabover was obsolete. Long-nosed conventional hoods stretched out again, and massive walk-in custom sleepers were born, bringing heavy steel and real comfort back to the American highway. As these rigs reclaimed the blacktop, the Mack-Peterbilt rivalry spilled onto the silver screen. Peterbilt became the symbol of highway dread. In Spielberg's Duel, a rusted, soot-stained 1955 Peterbilt 281 needle nose hunted a lone driver across the baking desert. With a clattering Cummins shaking its butterfly hoods, it cemented the brand as an unstoppable, smoking iron force. Mack took the opposite route, becoming the blue-collar outlaw hero. In 1978's Convoy, Rubber Duck drove a '77 Mack RS 712 LST. Under that long fiberglass hood sat Mack's legendary Maxidyne diesel paired with a 5-speed Maxitorque transmission. Capped with a custom Mohawk-wearing Bulldog, that rig became an instant counterculture icon. That rugged reputation hit the breaking point in the Road Warrior. To survive a post-apocalyptic wasteland, they used a Mack R600 tanker equipped with a deafening, shrieking pneumatic air starter. The truck's legend was sealed during a massive on-the-fly rollover stunt performed by a regular delivery driver named Dennis Williams. The crash was violent, but Williams walked away from the wreckage asking for just one thing: his delayed breakfast. Though he did make sure to pry the Bulldog off the hood as a trophy to make up for his measly stunt pay. Off-screen, the engineering battle moved to the harshest dirt on Earth. In the Australian outback, Mack built the V8 Superliner to drag massive road trains across miles of corrugated washboard. They dropped a monstrous 16.4-liter E9 V8 under the hood, cranking out 500 horsepower and over 1,600 pound-feet of torque. And to handle that brute force, they used a specialized 3-point cab suspension. Without it, the violent vibrations would have shaken the steel and the driver's spine to dust within weeks. By the late 1980s, both brands peaked in mechanical power as the kings of freight. But as exhaust stacks dumped thicker, blacker soot, federal regulators started watching. The era of raw, choking diesel power was about to hit a brick wall, and you couldn't fix this problem with heavier steel or more rivets. By the late 80s, the thick black soot that defined American trucking hit a wall. In the 90s, the EPA clamped down hard on diesel emissions, and that changed everything for Mack and Peterbilt. For decades, they operated like family legacies. Now the suits moved in. Renault had already taken a massive bite out of Mack, and by 2000, Volvo swallowed them whole. Meanwhile, Packer, Peterbilt's parent company, ballooned into a global giant. The focus shifted from grease on the shop floor to margins in the boardroom. The pressure to hit quarterly profit targets crushed the old-school pride of building an honest machine. Profit over law became the new industry standard. In 1998, that mindset blew up into a massive scandal. Mack, along with heavy hitters like Caterpillar, Cummins, and Detroit Diesel, got caught using defeat devices. This was a piece of dual-mapping software engineered to beat the system. In the test lab, the code forced the engine to run clean and hit EPA numbers. But once the ECM read a steady cruising speed for a set amount of time, the software flipped a switch. Highway mode dumped raw power and better fuel mileage, but choked the air with illegal levels of nitrogen oxide. They rigged the game to keep performance up, breaking the law with every mile. The government dropped the hammer. Attorney General Janet Reno hit the engine makers with an $83.4 million civil penalty, the largest in history at the time. And while Mack was taking heat at home, Packer had its own dirt in Europe. They got busted in a price-fixing cartel that ran for 14 years. Manufacturers colluded to fix the premiums they charged for mandatory emissions upgrades. Over 600,000 independent haulers ate the cost, while the builders protected their bottom line. This regulatory chokehold kicked off the after-treatment nightmare. Trucks were crammed full of choking exhaust gas recirculation valves and heavy diesel particulate filters that created the parked regeneration headache. Mid-job, a driver was forced to pull over, sit for 40 minutes, and let the system dump raw diesel into the exhaust to bake the heavy soot out of the filter at a blistering 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. Ignore it, and the computer threw the truck into limp mode, capping you at a crawling 5 miles per hour. Because the software held all the cards, the right to repair died. Independent wrenchers didn't have the lockdown OEM software to clear the codes, leaving drivers stranded at expensive dealership bays. For the old guard, the golden era was over. The days of dialing up the fuel pump on a mechanical Cat 346B or a Mack E6 were dead. Owner-operators were saddled with rolling computers, choked with sensors that broke down and cost a fortune to replace. Every new mandate made the trucks heavier, hotter, and less reliable. It felt like the corporations and the government teamed up to bleed the guy behind the wheel dry. Trust was gone. If the suits were rigging the software, why should a driver play by rules that were bankrupting them? Corporate censors didn't just make the trucks harder to drive, they made them harder to love. For decades, a Peterbilt's beating heart wasn't its aluminum cab, it was the yellow iron bolted to the frame. The cat cult swore a rig wasn't real without a Caterpillar block, like the legendary C-15. Drivers lived for that rattling idle and the kind of brute force torque that could lay down 1,850 pound-feet to the asphalt and make dragging 80,000 pounds effortless. But power had a price. While competitors slapped heavy exhaust filters on their rigs, Caterpillar doubled down on the ACERT technology, strapping on twin turbos to cram air down the intake and burn off soot inside the cylinder. It was a disaster, spiking exhaust gas temperatures until the blocks baked. Astronomical heat cooked sensors and melted metal to slag. By 2008, Caterpillar washed their hands of the headache and quit the highway market, leaving loyalists scrambling to keep the old-school dream alive. Then came a massive government loophole, the glider kit. Under federal rules, manufacturers could sell rolling chassis, fresh frames and cabs missing engines and transmissions. Owner-operators dropped classic iron like a pre-emission 6NZ C15 or a legendary 3406E straight into those blank slates. It wasn't nostalgia, it was tactical. Bolting in an engine built before the year 2000 was the ultimate tax and emissions dodge. Drivers soon found out the feds left the back door wide open, since the ELD mandate exemption was based entirely on the age of the iron under the hood, not the shiny new chassis bolted around it. A mechanical and blunt dismissal of the rules. This wasn't just guys turning wrenches in pole barns. The glider market exploded. Outfits like Fitzgerald built a $700 million empire, rolling out 3,000 trucks a year packed with remanufactured cat blocks or bulletproof 12.7-liter Detroits. For a minute, the aluminum advantage outran the law, but the EPA caught the scent, issued the Phase 2 rule, reclassified gliders as new vehicles, and welded the loophole shut. While Peterbilt guys rebelled with hardware, Mack towed the corporate line, killing off their purebred iron for the high-tech Volvo-derived MP engine series. The rivalry wasn't just steel versus aluminum or East Coast Bulldog against West Coast Custom anymore. It was a fight for the road's mechanical soul against a sterilized future. With every new mandate, wiring harnesses grew thicker and tension between the cab and the boardroom snapped tighter. We're entering the final, most expensive chapter of this century-old war. Yellow iron and purebred diesels are getting shoved aside. The chrome shines and hood badges haven't changed, but the guts underneath are about to flip the industry upside down. The names on the grills are the same, but the iron underneath is being gutted. The industry is facing a massive economic shift. A standard diesel Class 8 tractor runs about $172,500, while the electric equivalent costs a staggering $411,200. You're paying more than double for a rig that does less work. Sure, electric motors give you instant torque, but dragging a loaded trailer up a 6% grade in the dead of summer can result in the computer throttling you into limp mode to save the batteries. Those massive battery packs also create a brutal payload penalty. You are trading a 3,000-pound iron block and saddle tanks for 10,000 pounds of lithium. Even with the feds offering a 2,000-pound weight allowance to bump the legal limit to 82,000 pounds, long-haul electrics face a 19% drop in cargo capacity, dragging the actual payload limit down to just 37,000 pounds. Less freight per trip means a harder grind to turn a profit, before you even factor in the hours spent chained to a standard fast charger while your hours of service clock bleeds out. This new reality is forcing both titans to change. The legendary Peterbilt 389, the long-nosed king of the highway, was put in the ground, forcing purists into the newer 589 just as the electric mandates closed in. Over in the Mack camp, they're pushing the LR Electric and the MD Electric as the high-tech future of the Bulldog. They are trying to prove a city-bound battery can carry the weight of a legend. This war isn't about heavy steel frames or polished chrome anymore. We are watching the raw mechanical era die, traded for a sterile, software-driven age. The hot, heavy roar of a straight-piped Cat C15 or a big block Cummins is being smothered by the cold hum of electric motors. But whether it's diesel smoke or silent lithium, the rivalry between these two giants remains the heartbeat of the American highway. Mack built the grinding, soot-covered world we work in, and Peterbilt built the long hood dream we wanted to drive. As that era is boxed in, the ultimate question isn't just whether you'd rather bang through a Mack Maxitorque box or float gears on an Eaton 18-speed. The real question is, Can the American owner-operator survive a sterilized future? Or will this silent lithium gamble erase the legacy of these titans forever? Gold Bulldog or Red Oval Needle Nose? Who gets your keys? Drop your side of this 100-year rivalry below.